But now, with that being said, and without further ado, let's get into tonight's stories, shall we? So, the first story was originally posted by a Reddit user called cashilisk. Their story is called A Shoe-Obsessed Stalker. Before I met my co-worker, he held some sort of managerial position at a store that sold shoes. For over a year, he received phone calls from a man who claimed to be inquiring about women's shoes. Now, due to this, he was only interested in speaking to female members of staff. Whenever he was able to speak to a female member of staff, he would ask her about the shoes that she was wearing and how comfortable they felt. According to my co-worker, these calls would take place almost daily. The caller seemed pleased to hear about shoes that were not sold in the store he was allegedly calling to inquire about. Now, thinking this was strange, my co-worker warned another shoe store in the area about this caller. That's probably a smart thing to do. The manager of that store claimed that they had been receiving similar calls. The caller never seemed to actually be interested in buying shoes. My co-worker blocked his number on 2 separate occasions, but he would simply change phone numbers and carry on calling. After having his number blocked a third time, he began actually entering the store and making women uncomfortable. My co-worker banned him from entering the store, and he accused him of involving unwilling participants in his fetish. Now, the man calmly denied making these phone calls. He also claimed that his interest in shoes was not sexual. He left the store, but ended up returning about a month later. My co-worker started shouting at the man, but he allegedly remained eerily calm. The store closed down less than a year later. Now, according to my co-worker, a strange car began pulling up outside his apartment complex and remaining there for hours. He mentioned this to me a few months ago, but I wasn't sure what to make of it at the time. I have experienced stalking, but it's hard to link the mysterious car to the man from the shoe store. Now, recently, however, I noticed that a strange man always seemed to follow us around during lunch. He wouldn't say anything. He would only stare at us. After I pointed out his presence, my co-worker informed me that he recognized the individual as the shoe-obsessed man who began calling the store years prior. By now, it has been 2 use Facebook, and I've never been Facebook friends with the co-worker that the man initially started targeting. That co-worker claimed to have deleted his Facebook account upon being made aware that the man was following him once again. He suspects that the man had used Facebook to track him down at his new job, but he also claims to be certain that his address would not have been on Facebook. He still remains certain that the car that waits outside his house is the shoe-obsessed stalker, and I believe him. Can you imagine having to deal with a person who goes to such lengths for his fetish? I mean, obviously, there is nothing wrong with having a fetish. There's loads of people who have fetishes, but the problem starts when you involve people who then unwillingly participate in this fetish without being properly informed beforehand. You see it on YouTube all the time. It happens in the ASMR community where people will make requests for custom videos, and it is actually to satisfy a fetish, but they don't tell the content creator about this. It happens all the time, and it's wrong. It's inherently wrong. But to then go to such great lengths to stalk a member of staff from the shoe store that you used to harass, to then also stalk one of the co-workers of said member of staff, that is absolutely wild to me, and I hope they contact authorities about this guy, because you don't know if it's gonna turn into something really dangerous over time. Alrighty, moving on to the second story of this evening, which was originally posted by a Reddit user called almalazone. This story is called Never That Safe. This happened in 2016 when I was a 17-year-old first-year college student in film school. I lived alone in my first ever apartment. It was really small, but I was really proud of my independence. I never felt unsafe in this apartment for several reasons. There were multiple gates in the residence that needed to be opened through a code only the people who lived there knew. My door had 3 different locks, and it was right next to the university, so most people who lived in the neighborhood were college students. Nothing bad had ever happened in the neighborhood before. I'm always very careful with locking the door when I leave my home. I always check twice because I have slight OCD. So this one time I leave to go to class and I lock my door, but for some reason I couldn't I just said, okay, and that was the end of it really. I really wasn't worried because of how safe I felt in this building. Now, flash forward to 2 months later. I was taking out the trash one night around 11 p.m. while I was on the phone with my sister. I remember telling her that I was taking out the trash, then that I would take a shower afterwards before heading to a party. As I previously said, I always lock the door, even just to take out the trash, because of my lock being damaged and I only lock it once. When I got back to my apartment, I found the door unlocked, which immediately alarmed me. So I went into the apartment and locked the door behind me immediately with 3 different types of locks. When you walk into my apartment, which is just 215 square feet, you have the main room in front of you and the bathroom door immediately to your left. I had left the bathroom door slightly open enough so I could see a man in my shower. He had his back turned towards me. Now naturally, when I saw this, I tried to open the door and leave as fast as possible, except my main lock was damaged from 2 months earlier, and I couldn't open it no matter how hard I tried. In this moment, all I could think of was the fact that I had to leave as fast as humanly possible. I jumped out of the window without really thinking. I figured it was the only solution, except I lived on the 2nd floor, so I completely smashed my ankles in the landing. I started running in whichever way I could, and when I got a little bit further from the building, I looked back, and a man was there, at my window, watching me run away. I thought of 2 possible outcomes. Either the man was going to jump and chase me, except I wouldn't get very far with twisted ankles, or he would get scared of the height and be locked inside my apartment. Luckily for me, he picked option 2. I went to hide in a bush a little further and called the police, who arrived in just 10 minutes because I live very close to the police station. They pushed my door open and the man was there, just sitting on my couch, holding a kitchen knife, waiting for me to come back, like he didn't think I would call the police. They arrested the guy and later told me he had already been arrested for sexual assault, rape, attempted kidnapping, and attempted murder. What? They also told me how everything had happened. Like I said, it was a very friendly neighborhood with mostly college students, so we got inside the building by other people holding the door for him. He then heard me telling my sister I was going to take a shower, which is why he was waiting in the bathroom for me, particularly in the shower. I can't imagine living through a situation like that. I mean, it must be so traumatizing. You know, the fact that this is a known criminal who, without you knowing, has been following you around, you know, lurking in the shadows, watching you on campus and following you to your home. You know, I wonder that when the lock just suddenly broke 2 months before this incident, whether it was actually him who attempted to break into our apartment and then broke the lock that way. You know, it wouldn't surprise me if that was actually him. The audacity as well of this man who was just, you know, sat there in her living room holding her kitchen knife, waiting for her to return. That is mental to me. Like, that's how the police found him. I'm so glad they got him though, because obviously, you know, there's something not right in that coconut. Christ. What a badass move as well to jump through the window. Like, that is so badass. I'm so glad that the original poster managed to get away safely before, you know, the guy got out of the shower and attacked her or something, because that, you know, was clearly his intention. If you're gonna wait for someone to return holding a kitchen knife, you know, you're not gonna tell me that you don't have the intention to hurt them. But that, wow, that is such a wild story, and I'm so sorry for this Redditor that this happened to her. Moving on to the last story of this evening. This one was originally posted by a user called princessmilktea. Their story is called Man Follows Me from a Bus to a Ferry. I go to university 2 hours away by ferry from the mainland where my family lives. Sometimes on weekends I would go visit them, which would require me to take a 23-kilometer bus ride to the ferry terminal. This bus ride was usually very boring and long, so I would try to make the best of it. Now where I live, we have double-decker buses, and I would always sit at the top and listen to music. One Friday, on my way to the terminal, I was up on the top level as usual when a man who looked to be about 40 came up to sit. I made note of his presence, but I didn't think much of it. He looked pretty beat up, shaggy hair, stained brown hoodie, a silver chain on his neck. But I try not to judge. It's important to note that at the time I was 18 years old and I'm a small female. I don't ever want to have to be hyper-aware or judgmental, but I was brought up to always take note of who is around me, particularly men, just for safety. The man sat multiple rows ahead of me, and he was initially minding his own business. I was just listening listening to music and looking out the window, minding my own. It wasn't until partway into the trip that I noticed he had moved one row closer to me. Weird, but whatever. Maybe his seat was dirty or something. He then proceeded to move closer and closer until he was in the seat directly in front of me. It's important to know that the top level of the bus is only him and me, no other passengers. Suffice to say, I was getting uncomfortable. Still giving him the benefit of the doubt, I decided to phone a friend and have a conversation just to break the uncomfortable silence. I texted my friend SOS, which we do when we need the other to call us for whatever reason, and he calls me and starts a normal conversation. It was at this point that this man decides that he wants to talk to me. I tell my friend to hold on and I take out my earbud to hear what he's saying. He starts asking me questions and he asks if I know any good place to get a haircut around there, and I say I don't. I start to put my earbuds back in when he asks what a girl like me is doing taking this bus all alone. It wasn't late yet, but it was getting dark, so maybe he was just concerned for my safety. LOL. I told him I was going to the ferry terminal. Everyone on this bus is, that is literally the only thing that this bus does is go to the ferry and back. And I try once again to put my earbuds back in. He continues on, telling me his whole life story about how he was in the military, how his kids don't talk to him, showed me his dog tag, and told me he rides this bus back and forth every day just to have something to do, as if that's not already creepy. He has no intention of taking the ferry though, and this you need to remember because this is important for later. He's growing increasingly annoyed that I'm not reciprocating the conversation. He tells me it's quite rude to ignore people when they're just trying to have a friendly conversation. Now, at this point, I'm starting to get quite creeped out. I politely inform him that I'm not trying to ignore him, but I'm on the phone with someone and I would like to resume my conversation. guess who comes down the escalator? Mr. Dog Tags himself. My heart sank. There are a couple of people in the waiting area, so I wasn't too worried about my immediate safety, but I was more worried about having to be trapped on a boat with this guy for 2 hours. Now, he paced up and down the walkway outside the washrooms repeatedly, checking to see if I had moved, briefly ducking into the men's room and coming back out after a couple of minutes. He goes up and down the escalator a few times and continued to try to catch my eye, either smiling or just creepily staring. Now, I had had enough at this point, and I started looking for other passengers that I could sit with for security. I see a woman in her mid-40s, and my teenage instinct to seek maternal security kicks in. I bring my bag and politely ask this woman if I can sit with her. I quietly explain what was happening, and this woman goes full-on Mama Bear, bless her soul. She told me she had noticed the man too, and she had gotten a bad feeling. She had 2 daughters around my age. She insisted I sit with her on the ferry too, just in case. Oh, bless this woman, what a nice woman. The girl sitting across from us in the seating area overheard, and she offered her support as well. We boarded the ferry together, and I didn't notice the man as we boarded. I assumed that he had left the terminal, as he said he never intended to catch the ferry in the first place. As we are seated on the ferry, my heart drops when I see him coming towards our seating area. The nice mum assures me that she'll handle it if he dares to approach us, but he notices that I'm not alone anymore, and I guess he decides to do a lap instead. We later saw him try to bother another young girl, but luckily her boyfriend returned from the food lineup and the guy took off pretty fast. For the rest of the ferry, he was sort of just lurking, checking in to see if I'd gotten up or left my group. I did not, even though I had to pee really bad. Not worth it. The girl we were with eventually flags down a ferry worker, and she informs him of this suspicious person. And Dog Tag hightails it to the other side of the vessel. When we reached the other side, the mum insisted on walking me directly to my dad's car in the pickup zone before leaving the terminal herself, and that was the end of it, thankfully. I wish that woman nothing but wonderful things in her life. She was so kind and protective. I genuinely don't know how the evening would have played out without her. I don't know what this man's plan was, and I don't want to, but being followed on 2 forms of transportation is definitely a new one for me. Secondly, elephant in the room. What kind of psycho does that? I mean, clearly this guy doesn't have anything to do in his life. He's got all the time in the world because he takes that bus every single day just to have something to do. Or he's just, a full-on predator and he takes that bus not to have something to do, but to find a victim, to scope out girls on their own, which is even sicker. This story really, really reminded me of the time that I got followed from the station where I work all the way to my own home. There was a train ride involved and everything. And that story is also on the channel if you want to check that out. It's in my personal scary stories video. But it just really reminded me of that. And I know how terrified I was when I was walking up my driveway and someone shouted at me and I turned around and it was the same creeper that had been staring at me at the station where I work. I just remember being absolutely terrified, feeling helpless, and I really, really admire this girl from the story for finding help, for going up to that woman and asking if she can sit with her. That is the absolute best thing to do and the best way to handle that situation. I'm glad that nothing really serious happened in this situation because, he could have done. What if she had been alone the entire time? He might have kidnapped her. I mean, if you are deranged enough to follow a girl on her own onto a ferry that you have no business in taking, that is wild. He literally had no business of taking that ferry. He said it himself, he just rides the bus back and forth. This guy sat on this 2-hour bus ride, then went through the trouble of buying a ticket for this ferry.